There was a very specific kind of pleading that happened in American households in the 1990s. Not the whining you did over dessert, the other kind, the kind where you brought your parents a magazine ad, a catalog page folded down at the corner, or just stood in the mall aisle with a look on your face that said your entire social future depended on the next 90 seconds. 20 things. 20 objects, gadgets, toys, and outfits that 90s teenagers would have traded a kidney for. Some of them cost $6. Some of them cost $200. All of them mattered more than anything reasonable should, and every single one came with its own negotiation script. The allowance-saving, chore-doing, birthday and Christmas combining campaign that started weeks or months before the object actually showed up wrapped or bagged in your hands. Half of these you'll recognize instantly. A few of them you might have forgotten completely until the second we say the name, and it all comes rushing back. The smell, the sound, the exact spot in your childhood bedroom where it lived. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up to the one that ruined the most bedtimes in America. 20. The Trapper Keeper. It started as a boring idea. A meat employee named John Wyant, working off a request to solve a real problem, figured out that kids needed one binder that held everything instead of a locker full of loose folders. Meade rolled it out nationally in the summer of 1981, and within a few years it wasn't a school supply anymore. It was a personality. The early models snapped shut with a metal clasp. Then Meade switched to velcro because it was cheaper to manufacture, and that single decision changed the sound of every classroom in America. You didn't open your Trapper Keeper quietly. You ripped it open, and everyone within 3 desks knew exactly what you were doing. Between 1988 and 1995, Meade's designer series turned the covers into a battlefield of taste. Psychedelic swirls, neon geometrics, and eventually a partnership with a certain rainbow-colored artist we'll get to in a minute. Teachers hated the Velcro noise so much that some schools put the Trapper Keeper on official do-not-purchase lists. Partly for the ripping sound, and partly because the built-in multiplication tables and conversion charts printed inside felt like a cheat sheet. There was also a genuine case of mistaken identity behind some of those bands, since administrators sometimes confused oversized, 3-inch thick binders with the real thing and outlawed the wrong product entirely. None of that stopped a single kid from wanting one. Inside, the sliding plastic rings held actual folders with angled pockets. A small innovation borrowed from West Coast school folders that kept papers from sliding out the top, which sounds minor until you're the kid whose homework scattered across a hallway floor because your folder didn't have one. By the time you graduated middle school, your Trapper Keeper had survived more damage than anything else in your backpack and still somehow held together. If one of these hit a little too close to home, let us know which one down in the comments. We read every single one, and if this is your first time here, welcome. Hit subscribe, we're doing this every week. 19. Lisa Frank, Everything. If your Trapper Keeper wasn't Lisa Frank, it wasn't finished. Meade's designer series eventually licensed her artwork directly, and once that happened, the folders, stickers, and pencil pouches stopped being school supplies and became currency. A single sheet of Lisa Frank stickers, dolphins leaping through rainbow explosions, tigers with glitter eyes, unicorns that made no biological sense, was tradable in the hallway, the way baseball cards were tradable a generation earlier. You didn't just own a Trapper Keeper with a Lisa Frank cover. You built a whole aesthetic identity around it. The folders matched the pencil case, which matched the stickers on the inside cover, which matched absolutely nothing in the natural world, and that was the entire point. The stickers themselves became a kind of social capital independent of anything they were stuck to. A rare sheet, the ones packed with metallic foil animals instead of the standard matte ones, could get you through an entire lunch period of negotiations. Kids peeled them off backing sheets, pressed them onto notebook covers, trapper flaps, and occasionally directly onto skin, and traded duplicates the way collectors traded rare cards, except nobody kept a price guide. The value was purely social and entirely local to whatever classroom you happened to sit in. Parents footed the bill without fully understanding what they were funding, which was, functionally, a fever dream printed on cardstock. 18. Slap bracelets. They looked like a strip of stiff fabric-wrapped metal, and then you snapped one against your wrist and it curled itself into a bracelet like a magic trick. For about a year and a half in the early 90s, every kid in America wanted a fistful of them stacked up one arm. The trick was a flat piece of spring steel sealed inside the fabric. Snap it against a hard surface, and physics did the rest. Schools started banning them almost immediately, not because they were rowdy, but because a handful of kids managed to slice their wrists open on bracelets where the metal casing had split, usually cheap knockoff versions rather than the original brand. Though that distinction didn't matter much once a single injury made the local news. That's the kind of detail that turns a $5 toy into a full-blown classroom controversy. Teachers confiscating them by the bucket while kids smuggled replacement bracelets in their backpacks the very next day. They came in denim print, animal print, and neon solids. And the real flex wasn't owning one. It was owning a full stack up one forearm, snapping them on one at a time in the hallway between classes, like you were suiting up for battle. 17. Butterfly hair clips. They came in a plastic mesh bag, a dozen or more clips shaped like butterflies in colors that didn't exist anywhere in nature. You didn't wear one. You wore 6, 7, 10, clipped in a row along a center part or scattered across a half-up hairstyle until your head looked like a garden. They were cheap enough that you could buy a full bag with allowance money, which made them one of the rare 90s trends that didn't actually require begging your parents for much. That accessibility is exactly why they were everywhere by 1998 and 1999, in every school hallway, on every teen sitcom. Clipped into hair that had also been crimped, another trend that briefly ruled the decade and then vanished as fast as it arrived. 16. Choker necklaces. A thin band tied around the throat, sometimes velvet, sometimes plastic tattoo style, sometimes just a strip of leather with a single bead. Chokers had actually floated in and out of fashion for decades, but the 90s version became inseparable from a very specific look. Slip dresses, platform sneakers, and a general air of studied nonchalance borrowed from the decade's teen dramas and pop stars. The tattoo choker, the one that looked like a permanent piece of jewelry etched straight onto the neck, was the most requested version at the mall kiosk. And mall kiosks selling nothing but chokers and hemp bracelets became their own strange retail category by the back half of the decade. You wore it to school, to the movies, to the mall you'd just bought it at. It said nothing specific and everything at once. 15. Mood rings. The pitch was simple and mostly nonsense. A ring with a heat-sensitive stone that supposedly revealed your emotional state through color. Blue meant calm. Black meant stressed. Every kid who owned one became a temporary expert in a system that was really just measuring finger temperature. But nobody cared, because it felt like wearing a diagnostic tool for your own feelings. They'd first shown up in the 70s, but a cheap remanufacturing wave brought them roaring back into vending machines, gumball dispensers, and gas station spinner racks throughout the 90s, priced low enough that they became an easy yes from a parent standing in a checkout line. You'd stare at your finger between classes, convinced the ring was reading your soul, when really it was just reading room temperature. Best friends bought matching ones. Couples in 7th grade traded them as a substitute for a promise ring neither of them could actually afford. And when the color chart printed on the little cardboard insert claimed you were passionate or anxious, based on a stone that cost about 9 cents to manufacture, nobody questioned the science, because questioning it would have ruined the fun. 14. Tamagotchi. It fit in your palm. It had 3 buttons. And for one genuinely stressful year, it broke more classroom concentration than any toy before it. Bandai's digital pet launched in Japan in November 1996 and crossed over to the United States the following spring, where it detonated instantly. The entire premise was obligation. You hatched a pixelated creature that needed feeding, cleaning, and attention on a rolling schedule, day and night, and if you ignored it long enough, it died. On screen, with a little tombstone animation that somehow still managed to make 10-year-olds cry. Kids smuggled them into homeroom clipped to backpack straps, teachers confiscated them in bulk, and schools across the country moved to ban them outright by 1997. Because a toy that beeped for attention during a spelling test was, understandably, a problem administrators hadn't planned for. 13. Skip It, a plastic hoop around your ankle, a weighted ball on a cord, and a mission to keep it spinning while you hopped over the cord with your other foot without breaking stride. Tiger Electronics picked up the rights to the toy in 1988 and gave it a redesign that included the feature that made it a phenomenon, a mechanical counter built right into the ball, so every kid on the block could turn a backyard toy into a competition. Tiger leaned hard into that competitive angle, running national Tiger Challenge events at shopping malls where hundreds of kids showed up to battle for the high score, with a family trip to the Bahamas on the line for the national winner. The toy peaked between 1990 and 1992, but stayed on shelves well into the mid-90s, and if you grew up in that window, there's a decent chance you can still recite the jingle from memory, whether you want to or not. If one of these hit a little too close to home, let us know which one down in the comments. We read every single one. And if this is your first time here, welcome, hit subscribe. We're doing this every week. 12. The Talkboy. This one has one of the strangest origin stories on the list. It wasn't designed as a toy first. It was designed as a movie prop. Tiger Electronics built the original Talkboy specifically for Macaulay Culkin's character to use in Home Alone 2. Lost in New York, and when 20th Century Fox agreed to let Tiger put a real version on shelves to coincide with the film, the toy that hit stores was missing most of the voice-altering features the movie version had. Consumers noticed, and sales were lukewarm at first. Tiger corrected course fast, releasing the Talkboy Deluxe with the pitch-shifting playback the commercials had promised, and that version sold out faster than the company could restock it. Every kid who owned one spent months recording their own voice into a robotic slur and playing back conversations they definitely weren't supposed to be recording in the first place. 11. Gak and Nickelodeon. Slime. Nickelodeon built an entire brand identity around dumping slime on people, and it was only a matter of time before that slime ended up in a plastic egg on toy store shelves. Gak, made by Nickelodeon and manufactured through a partnership with Mattel, hit shelves in the early 90s in a bright green egg-shaped container, and the sound it made, a wet farting squelch when you pressed it flat, was half the reason kids bought it in the first place. Follow-up versions kept multiplying. Floam with tiny foam beads mixed in, Gak that stretched, Gak that glowed, Gak that came with its own accessories for stamping shapes into it. Parents tolerated it right up until it got worked into the living room carpet, at which point it became the single most hated substance in the American household, at least until the next slime variant showed up under the Christmas tree anyway. The real appeal was tactile more than visual. You could stretch it thin enough to see light through it, roll it into a ball and bounce it off a hardwood floor, or press it flat over your face and peel it off slowly, which every kid attempted at least once regardless of how many times a parent said not to. It never really did anything. It just felt satisfying in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who hadn't grown up squeezing a plastic egg full of neon goo. 10. Bop It. Hasbro released Bop It in 1996, and the entire toy was built around a single joke. A machine that barked commands at you and got angrier the faster you failed. Bop it, twist it, pull it. The voice sped up with every successful round until your hands couldn't keep up with your own reflexes, and the whole thing ended in a burst of mechanical laughter that felt almost personal. It became a sleepover staple and a car ride staple in equal measure, small enough to travel and loud enough to be genuinely annoying to any adult trapped in the same room. Later versions added new commands and new attitude, but the core appeal never changed. A toy that dared you to keep up with it and won almost every single time. 9. Trolls Dolls. The naked, wide-eyed, wildly haired troll doll had actually been invented back in the 1960s by a Danish woodcutter, but the 90s brought it roaring back into American bedrooms in a second wave nobody saw coming. Suddenly, every toy store had a wall of trolls in every neon hair color imaginable. Gem Belly Edition, glow-in-the-dark editions, troll dolls dressed as cheerleaders and troll dolls with rhinestone-studded belly buttons. Kids collected them the way other kids collected Beanie Babies, lining them up on windowsills and school desks, trading rare colors, and clipping the smaller keychain versions onto backpack zippers. There was no real gameplay involved. You just owned them, displayed them, and occasionally used the wild hair as a stress toy during a boring class, which honestly might have been the entire appeal. Some kids brushed the hair into elaborate styles with a doll-sized comb that came packaged in the box. Others cut it short out of pure boredom and immediately regretted it, because trimmed troll hair never grew back, and a bald troll doll was worth exactly nothing on the playground trading market. 8. Beanie Babies. What began in 1993 as a modest line of small, underfilled plush animals from a Chicago businessman named Ty Warner turned, by the late 90s, into one of the strangest financial fevers of the decade. Warner's real innovation wasn't the toy, it was the scarcity. He deliberately retired specific designs without warning, restricted how many any single store could stock, and let a secondary market of price guides and swap meets do the rest of the work, convincing families that a $5 stuffed animal might be worth thousands someday. At the peak of the mania, Beanie Babies accounted for more than $1 billion in annual sales, and the frenzy got strange enough that a police department outside Chicago ran a program letting people trade in firearms for Beanie Babies. Ty finally announced on December 31, 1999, that the entire line would retire at midnight, sparking a final buying panic before the bubble deflated for good over the next couple of years. For a solid stretch of the decade, though, the tag was worth more to some families than the toy sewn onto it. 7. Furby. It looked like the offspring of a cat and an owl, spoke its own made-up language, and turned into the most fought-over gift of the 1998 holiday season. Tiger Electronics, riding high off Skip It and the Talkboy, released Furby on October 2, 1998, at a retail price around $30 to $35, and demand outran production almost instantly. By the peak of the holiday shortage, Furbies were reselling in newspaper classifieds and early online auctions for anywhere from $100 to several $100s. Tiger sold 1.8 million units in that first partial year alone, then 14 million more in 1999. The toy was engineered to speak mostly in its own invented Furbish language at first, gradually shifting toward English the more it got used, which made every Furby feel like it was slowly learning to talk specifically to you. A rumor even circulated in early 1999 that the National Security Agency had banned Furbies from secure government buildings over fears the microphone could record classified conversations, which, true or not, only made the toy feel more dangerous and more desirable. 6. Spice Girls, dolls. Spice Mania didn't stay confined to CDs and posters for long. In October 1997, toy company Galoob announced a licensing deal to produce official Spice Girls dolls, and the timeline got moved up so fast to catch the Christmas rush that the first girl power wave shipped with barely 2 months of preparation, leading to shortages that had industry watchers bracing for the kind of shopping chaos usually reserved for the biggest holiday toys. The dolls sold over 11 million units across their run, making them the best-selling celebrity dolls ever produced. Jerry Halliwell's doll, dressed in her iconic Union Jack mini dress, became the most sought-after figure in the line, especially after she left the group in 1998 and the remaining sets shifted to feature only the 4 members who stayed. If you were a Spice Girls fan with even a modest allowance, there was a real chance your bedroom shelf turned into a full $5 lineup by the time the fad peaked. 5. Rollerblades. 2 hockey-playing brothers from Minneapolis, Scott and Brennan Olson, built the first modern inline skates around 1980 as an off-season training tool, never intending to launch a national obsession. By the early 90s, their company, Rollerblade, had become so dominant that the brand name turned into the generic term for the entire sport, the way people say Kleenex instead of tissue. The craze exploded fast. Industry trackers cited inline skating as the fastest-growing sport in the country through the mid-90s, feeding an estimated $700 million market by the middle of the decade. Every kid wanted the skates, the knee pads, the wrist guards, and the specific brand name stitched across the boot, because generic inline skates from a discount store simply did not carry the same social weight as the real thing rolling down the driveway. 4. Nintendo 64. Nintendo's answer to the console wars landed in the United States in September 1996, priced at $199 and it looked nothing like anything else on the shelf. The controller alone was a small scandal. 3 handles instead of 1. A design so strange that kids spent the first week of ownership just figuring out which grip felt natural. Once Super Mario 64 and GoldenEye 007 hit living rooms, none of that strangeness mattered anymore. The N64 became the console that turned a single television into a battleground for 4 players at once, split-screen shooting matches and go-kart races that ran until somebody's parents shut the lights off. The cartridges were chunky, expensive, and occasionally required the exact right amount of blowing into the slot to get working. A ritual every 90s kid performed with total, unshakable confidence that it actually did something. A new N64 game routinely ran $40 to $60 at a time when a movie ticket cost about $4, which meant most households owned a modest handful of cartridges, and every kid on the block memorized which house had the good ones. The console itself became a kind of social hub in a way that solo handhelds never quite managed, since 4 controller ports meant an entire birthday party could crowd onto one couch and take turns losing to whoever had spent the most hours practicing after school. 3. Doc Martens. The boots had been a British subculture staple for decades before American teenagers ever got their hands on a pair. First adopted by skinheads and punks in the UK, then carried across the Atlantic by hardcore musicians touring Britain who brought pairs home in their luggage. Grunge picked the boots up next, and by the time Nirvana's influence had filtered all the way down to American middle schools, the 8-eye black boot with the yellow welt stitching had become a full-blown teenage status symbol. The boots weren't cheap, and they weren't comfortable out of the box either. Most owners spent the first 2 weeks breaking them in through genuine physical discomfort. That didn't stop the trend from crossing over from the flannel and band tee crowd straight into the cheerleading squad. The boots even showed up on screen in movies like Empire Records, cementing the connection between Doc Martens and a very specific brand of 90s teenage identity, whether or not the kid wearing them had ever actually heard a Nirvana record. 2. Surge and the Great 90s. Soda Wars. Soda companies figured out something important in the mid-90s. Teenagers wanted a drink that felt like it belonged to them specifically, not something their parents also drank. Coca-Cola answered with Surge in 1996, a neon green citrus soda, marketed almost entirely on caffeine content and extreme sports energy. All snowboards and skate ramps in the commercials, daring you to feel like the can itself was a dare. Pepsi ran its own version of the same play with Crystal Pepsi a few years earlier, a clear cola that promised a purer taste and mostly delivered confusion, since a cola that looked like water short-circuited a lot of expectations at first sip. Neither drink lasted the full decade on shelves. Both eventually pulled and later revived in small nostalgia runs, decades later. But for a window in the 90s, walking into a gas station and choosing the loud green can over regular Coke felt like a genuine act of teenage self-definition. 1. The pager. Before the flip phone, before texting cost a dime a message, there was the pager clipped to a waistband or a backpack strap, and getting one felt like the single biggest status leap available to an American teenager. Pagers had existed for doctors and business people for years, but by the mid-90s, falling prices and a wave of youth-targeted marketing turned the beeper into a teenage rite of passage, something you begged for the way earlier generations begged for a driver's license. The appeal wasn't really about the technology. It was about being reachable and about the numeric code language that grew up around it. 143 for I love you. 07734 flipped upside down to spell a word every 12-year-old found hilarious. Entire conversations conducted in digits punched into a payphone. Parents worried it made kids too easy to track down, or worse, too easy for the wrong people to reach. And plenty of schools banned them outright over fears they were being used to arrange drug deals, which occasionally in some cities they actually were. For most teenagers, though, a pager buzzing on your hip in the middle of English class was proof that somebody, somewhere, needed to talk to you right now. And in 1996, that feeling was worth more than almost anything else on this list. 20 things, and we probably still missed one. Tell us in the comments what we left off this list, because if enough of you ask, there's a part 2 in this for sure. Thanks for taking this trip back with us. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, There's a new one of these every week, and we'll see you in the next video.